The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon and welcome to our third in a series of Wellness Wednesdays. This is Bob Boone, President of the Medical Fitness Association. We're glad you're here for a very timely call today. We're very lucky to have some great speakers today to help us talk about getting started again. I know everybody's worried about still being closed and where we go next, but it's time to really start thinking about what do we need to do to plan to reopen and perhaps make some changes along the way. Before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping notes for you. On the Medical Fitness website, under our resources tab, there's now a new page called COVID-19 Resources. And as we gather new resources virtually every day, we're adding to that. So we encourage you to check there early and often to see what resources are out there, information on the Payroll Protection Act, the CARES Act, other information that might be valuable to you, as well as the results. We will be posting the results of some surveys we're in the process of putting out at some member requests. So check there early and often, and that information is constantly being updated. I thought it might be interesting for you to know, I just recently, like in the last couple of hours, got a COVID-19 update from the CDC. And there's some good news and some bad news. So I thought I would just kind of let you know what is the state of the pandemic right now across the country. And I will post this information on the COVID resources page after this meeting. First off, the total infections reported in the US through yesterday are 392,594. That's a lot. And to date, there's a significant mortality rate of 12,621 people who have died. What's important about those numbers, beside just the fact that they're large numbers, is that we're currently seeing a 19.1% infection rate and a 3.21% mortality rate. And what has people concerned, a lot of people are still talking about, well, why do we have to be holed up? The real concern out of all of this is the seasonal flu. There's always a lot more deaths in the seasonal flu than we're seeing with this COVID-19, but the mortality rate for seasonal flu is 0.1%, as opposed to now what we're seeing nationally, a 3.21% mortality rate. And that's the concern from a public health perspective. So that's the bad news. So what's the better news? The better news is that as of April the 3rd, the infection rate appears to have topped out and has been trending slightly lower ever since. So we're close to a plateau, if not at the plateau or at the apex, and we're beginning to slightly trend down on infection rates. That's a good thing. Mortality rates are slowing. They're still growing, but they're growing at a lower rate. And they've been trending slightly lower every day since March the 31st. There was a small spike yesterday, and I don't think we've quite yet reached the peak from mortality rates, but we're getting very close to a plateau when you look at the data. So I think all the indications, all the signs are from the epidemiological data is that we are nearing, if not at the apex of the pandemic. So it's timely that we begin thinking about what happens on the other end of the pandemic. When do we start planning on restarting, and how do we do that in the most effective way? To help us look at that today, I want to introduce to you, or reintroduce to you, Paul and Josh from Power Wellness. They have been with us each week. And today we also are blessed to have Andy Dunn from Life Fitness. These three will be presenting over the next 40 minutes or so, talking about strategizing for your reopening and perhaps offering some different thoughts. So Paul Prather and Josh Carlson, take it away.
Thanks, Bob. I appreciate that introduction. And actually some pretty interesting data keeps coming forward. I'm never just blown away by the amount of information that comes out about this. It's affecting all of our lives in every way, shape, and form. And I think the more information we get, the better we can start making decisions like what we're going to talk about today. Thank you all again for joining us. My name is Paul Prather. I'm the Vice President of Client Development for Power Wellness. And while I act in a business development role for my company, my background is heavily in operations of wellness centers, fitness centers, YMCAs, sports performance businesses, etc. So some of the things I'm going to talk about today are coming from some of my own background. A lot of it is coming from what we as a company, Power Wellness, are looking at in preparation of our client sites reopening. And, I hope that, y'all understand we don't have all the answers, and some of the information and ideas may not directly apply to your situation. But I think these are good starting points for everyone to kind of take a look at what it's going to take to really successfully leverage your situation and open back up when the time is allowable. And I think there's a couple of key points to think about there, right? So first of all, Power Wellness as a whole, we are a management company, and we do a lot of our work around what we call transitions, which are where we may go in and take over for and manage an existing fitness center with an existing membership and existing staff. And so a lot of our work takes place annually around dealing with scenarios kind of like restarting a center. Now, bear in mind, most of those are already in operations, but at the same time, the platform and the systems that we use are somewhat similar. And so when we as a company, and we, by the way, we manage close to 45 centers, and we have begun our own strategic planning, obviously, around reopening. And what does that look like, and who needs to be involved, and so on and so forth. And so if you have not on your own began thinking about it, I would strongly encourage you to do so. And hopefully we can talk through some ideas here today. So first and foremost is, I like to have the idea of having a mantra and have a plan, have a system, work that plan, work that system, and then be completely willing to be nimble and pivot if you need to. I can't stress this enough. We will all go into this with the intent of following through with our plan and execute it. But the likelihood is we're going to hit some hiccups and we're going to hit some challenges that we didn't plan for. No one's really ever done this before. And so the best we can do is try to look forward all the possible divots and challenges that we may come across and plan for them. So I would start this with communication first and foremost. And, the reason why I say this is last week we had Eric Tepper on, and he was talking about member communication and engagement. And in my definition of it right now, I'm going to talk about it in terms of, making sure that you are top of mind while you're closed for your existing members. There might be some folks out there that have communicated daily, bi-weekly, weekly to their membership base. Some may be doing it multiple times per day. I think that's going to be pretty critical when it comes time to reopen. I think what you don't want to do is have a scenario based around where you had a pretty big communication around closing and were mainly silent, and then you have a big communication around opening. I think you're going to miss out on a lot of your existing members, and they may have moved on from you in that interim, and let's hope that they don't. So what can you do now if you haven't been communicating effectively or at all with your membership base? Start now. Find a means that is reliable, that's measurable, that is consistent, and ideally, if possible, reciprocal, one where they can communicate back, if that's social media, emails, phone calls, whatever you have. And you want to make sure it's effective and it's working now, so that when the time does come to start opening, your message is going to be effectively sent out. Okay. And bear in mind too, if you're not communicating with your members now, someone else likely is, or they're on their own, finding their own new sources of information on what to do with their time right now for their fitness and wellness. So secondly, in communication are your employees. And I know a number of y'all sadly had to either reduce hours or furlough or let go a number of your staff. And I know that's a challenge that our industry as a whole has been dealing with. and hopefully very soon we can reopen and bring our family back together, right? And ideally, you're communicating with them too. Now, that may vary from organization to organization as to what you're allowed to do, or you may have HR guidelines allowing what you can or can't do. But if you're able, I think it would make a lot of sense to keep them in the loop on what the goings-ons are. Even if there's really nothing to report, I think connecting with your employees that you're wanting to bring back is going to be pretty critical when the time does come. 2, if you have employees who are currently on payroll still and are helping you do stuff, get them obviously to buy in on this opening plan, okay? Get their buy-in, get their 2 cents, make sure they're bought in so when the time comes to execute, you can go out and properly execute, okay? And then lastly, with an employee communication plan, it kind of helps you determine who you can count on to rehire and maybe perhaps figure out who might have moved on and you might have to find a replacement for, okay? So once you have definitely established that your communication is out there and effective, you want to start thinking about a timetable. Okay, now this is where it gets a little interesting. We don't really know when or how much lead time we're going to have to open. It might be different from state to state. We might get a go-ahead from, say the CDC or the federal government, but the state might not. Or the state might say go ahead, and you might get conflicting information. If we're part of a health system, maybe the health system isn't quite ready to move forward yet. Maybe other gyms in your market are opening up. So it's going to be a really interesting scenario how this plays out. And we've had a lot of debate internally about this too. But at the end of the day, you want to put that aside for a second and determine what's it going to take for you to reopen once you decide to say go. Okay. Is it 3 days? Is it 7 days? Is it 10 days? That's going to vary from site to site, and we can't tell you what that's going to be. But hopefully by building this plan out, you can help determine the amount of time you're going to need to make that happen. So it's going to depend on the size of your facility, the scope of your facility, how many employees were displaced that you have to bring back and rehire or reactivate. If your members canceled or if they were frozen, right? What's it going to take to get all that activated again, get staff back up and going, and re-prepare your facility for this new way of doing business. But either way, a plan is going to be necessary for you to effectively manage and prepare for this operation. We always like to start with the end in mind and work our way backwards, right? And I was describing this to one of my coworkers, and I said, it's kind of like preparing a big Thanksgiving meal, right? There's some things that are going to take 10 hours to cook, right? And you got to start those right away and get that process going and then forget about them for a bit. There's other things that are short and you can do right at the end, right before the meal's served, but gosh darn it, you better be darn sure it's going to go off. So you want to triple check that that's going to happen. So the same thing in reopening is there are some processes you got to start right away. There's some things that are pretty easy and you might think, oh gosh, there's no reason why that wouldn't happen. And all of a sudden you realize, oh boy, we don't have internet to the building. We shut it off, we forgot. And now your internet doesn't work, your Wi-Fi doesn't work, you can't have access to your member management system, all the data, TVs, all those things go down, right? These are the types of processes and things you need to think about. Make a spreadsheet, break it out by department, and start figuring out what it's going to take for you to open your building. We've been thinking in terms of 7 days in a lot of our sites, but that's going to vary for you, okay? And it's going to be very case dependent. Even if the state or the government says you guys can open in 2 days, you might still want to take those 7-10 days to make sure you do it right. Because you have to measure that risk versus reward of doing it well and safely versus doing it as fast as you can and hopefully not making an error that causes someone to get sick, right? So let's break this down by segments or sections or departments, however you want to look at it. Now, I also understand for a lot of you folks out there, some of these departments might all fall underneath your management purview. Or for some larger centers, you might have department heads that this might pertain to. But either way, these are things and ways that you could break this down and make it assignable, so actionable, so that you can assign it out to your different team members and make sure things get done. So first and foremost, let's start with HR, okay? First, things to consider. Build out an employee rehire roster, right? Everyone that was on your team when you closed, if you know of anyone who has definitely moved on and who is eligible for rehire, okay? What does your onboarding process look like to bring those people back? Do you have to go through drug screens and background checks again? Were they just frozen or hours zeroed out, or were they actually laid off? What process do you have to go through to bring those people back, and how long is it going to take, right? Could take a week, could take 3 days, could be 5 minutes. I think it depends on everyone's employment system. To develop an opening team, right? Who do you need to bring back in the lead up to opening the building? Is it your membership director? Is it your membership director and all your sales team? Maybe some membership front desk staff, facility director? Who do you need in that building for the days leading up to opening up the facility? Who's your go-to team? You need to figure out who that's going to be and make sure that they're still able to come back if you did lay them off, and that they're able to execute and ready to go. Okay. Personally, I would probably want my membership and front desk staff reactivated to make sure that they can help reactivate the frozen memberships. That can all be done leading up to, hopefully, the opening of the building, so that a large portion of your members can come right back in and get started without too much difficulty. Okay. For the members, for the team members you determine are definitely not returning, you probably need to start posting for those positions or finding replacements for them. I know there's a lot of strategies that are going to be going on right now, given the market. I think Andy's going to talk about some of those really interesting strategies on his talk. But, you have to plan for that and don't get caught off guard. You want to create a safety plan for your employees. How are you going to ensure their safety in this new scenario, and your members as well? Are you going to allow your team members to wear gloves and masks only when they're cleaning? What are you going to allow? What's going to happen? And anything else that might fall under that. Like I said, this is not a one size fits all, but these are considerations that you want to make sure you have and lay out there for your HR area. Next section I'd probably look at is information technology, or IT. And again, some of these things may seem like, oh gosh, that's so easy, I just turn the computer on. Well, one, make sure all your systems are online. Make sure your internet's online. Make sure your member management service is online, working and active. Make sure your the company you pay for member management has their help desk online. You don't want to get into a difficult scenario where they have an issue with their customer service due to one reason or another, and you don't know that. All right. Make sure your facility access is up and going. Okay. Equipment working properly. Is everything, it's been sitting vacant for not that long, but you never know. Make sure, go around, make sure everything is active and working correctly. Make sure your networked items are working correctly. If you have a network printer, or if you have a pretty large building and you have Wi-Fi, and your coaches or your staff might use tablets or something like that, make sure all that is working and active and proper. If you had to hire new employees, do they need user accounts? They need to get activated in the member management service. Do they need to be trained on how to use all this, right? Those are all things that need to be considered. And then lastly, when it comes to IT, what's your modifications for social distancing? For your member management service, for your facility access, some people might use biometrics. I don't think that's going to be really a usable item come forward with people putting their thumbs on a reader. Or if you have a membership card swiper, probably don't want to put it next to your membership desk. You might need to put it 6 feet away. These are all considerations that you have to play into when it comes to just talking about information technology. So again, things to consider and think about. Next area I might look at, and this is a big one, is operations. And a lot of different things fall under operations for different departments, for different facilities, but these are kind of our views of it. First and foremost is how are we going to match our staffing ramp up with our opening? Okay, the likelihood is you're not going to need a full staffing complement to open the first time you open. So think of it as a phased approach to staffing, that it matches the amount of members coming through the door, and it matches the areas you choose to open in the first week. You may decide and say, you know what, for safety's sake and to keep things in front of us, we just want to open up our general fitness floor. We're going to keep closed group exercise. We're going to keep closed, specialty services, maybe like personal training or massage therapy. We're going to keep the pools closed for now, and just keep everything in front of us on our fitness floor. And for safety's sake and control sake and making sure we get it right, do it that way. Okay, which means you only need so many staff back to make that happen. Your state may mandate that only a certain number of people can be inside the building per square foot, which might limit how many people you can have on the fitness floor, which will determine how many staff you may need in the building. You probably want to look at some amount of modified or controlled operational hours. As a lot of the grocery stores and a lot of the other essential services have right now, they've limited their hours of operation. A lot of times to accommodate and allow for cleaning at the end of the day and specialty services at the beginning of the day. So it may make sense to have an older adult time frame if they're allowed, if the higher risk folks are allowed out right away, which is a whole other topic. The first hour or two of the day might be designated for the older adults on your membership, so that they get to the cleanest, the highest cleanliness of the building. Ideally, you're maintaining that throughout the day. But obviously, if you do a big deep clean at the end of the day every day, then it might be cleanest when you first open. Excuse me. And obviously, you need to create some convenient cleaning stations that are beyond obvious and beyond, difficulty in finding for not just your members to use, but for your staff to use too. Clear staff cleaning plans. I'd recommend visibly and well documented throughout the building so that your members are well aware of what to expect when it comes time for cleaning. Hand sanitizing stations. And, this is still kind of being worked through. What do you do with water fountains? What do you do with locker rooms? How do you ensure someone doesn't put their mouth on the water fountain and then the next person comes behind them and they're, it's contagious potentially. So those are things to all be considered. Okay. So operations has a big, heavy hand in how this thing gets rolled out. And there's a lot of things to consider that are going to be very, very unique to your facility and your staff. The next thing I'd probably look at is risk management. Ensuring that I have created an abundance and reliance on signage surrounding the building and on the outside of the building and inside, reviewing all of your COVID-19 procedures so that your members are very clear on what the expectation is and should be, just like you've seen going into the grocery store, Costco, in your states. Ensure all your plans coincide with local and state mandates. Obviously, if they have a very clear allowance of what can be considered safe and effective for a fitness center to follow, we have to follow it. You have to make sure that your plan follows it as well. What's your rules going to be around staff allowances and PPE, personal protective equipment? Okay, I've seen that where a fitness center in a local city converted one of their fitness centers into childcare for the health system that was across the street. And they had a challenge around PPE because they didn't have enough to give to all their staff. And so then the people said, fine, we'll bring our own. They said, well, that's not fair if one person doesn't have it and you do. So they decided the employees shouldn't get a chance to get them. Take that for how you will, but you have to make a decision on what your rules are going to be surrounding that because it will come up, okay? And then obviously with risk, cleaning supplies and procedures, make sure that they meet the guidelines and the standards for keeping things safe. From different materials, types of cleaning solutions that are, for metal versus porous materials, door handles, glass, obviously the equipment goes without saying in any place and anywhere that a person might be. How are you going to clean your towels? Are you going to offer towels during this scenario, or do you just go without them for a while? Those are things that need to be considered and thought about in risk management. Next section I'll probably look at, this is a little shorter, is payroll. Relatively easily, but pretty gosh darn important, like I said. Reactivation of the employees. Make sure that they're set to go. The last thing you want to do is bring some folks in, get them working again, and then have a flub up with the payroll system. The other thing with that is like I said when I let off, have a plan, work your plan, but be prepared to be nimble and pivot. You might want to have some backups ready to go at the drop of a hat. If you need extra hands that you didn't budget for, it's better to be able to call them in, than not be able to call them in. So if that means you need to activate a couple extra employees in the first week or in the opening because there was something that was unaccounted for that you need extra hands to do, have the ability to get them on and make sure that the payroll is set and ready to rock. Okay. For purchasing, obviously, and this I think is where we're going to run into some tough spots, is stock up on cleaning supplies, cleaning stations, masks, gloves. If you don't have them yet in your facility, you need to buy some hand sanitation stations. Purchasing covers for equipment, if that's how you're going to create gaps in the cardio floor versus pulling equipment off the floor. All those things need to be planned for and bought. And I'm guessing, that's not my area of expertise, but my guess is they're going to be a little challenging to get your hands on in the coming weeks. So the sooner the better. A lot of y'all I've heard anecdotally have thought ahead and have been stocking up since February. Kudos to you, and I hope that's the case. Okay, winding up here. Talk about marketing. All right, now this is also one that's going to be really case dependent and specific to each individual center. So I don't want to try to tell you your business or how to go out there and do it. But obviously, our Anthony Albert will definitely speak to this. He's our director of marketing for Power. He's fantastic, by the way. Obviously, and it's a lot easier to keep your existing members than it is to go out and find one that's never been in the building, right? A lot less expensive. And I would focus a lot of your time on getting those people back in and making sure that you start up as close as possible as you can as when you shut the building down in regards to your bank draft and your membership unit count. Now, everyone's going to lose members through this, right? So the goal is to mitigate as few losses as possible. When you bring people back, there's kind of a two-pronged thought process. Is marketing towards getting your existing people to come back in and reactivate if you don't have it automatic. And then two, getting your people to rejoin who canceled and new members coming in the door. You may subdivide those up, obviously, if you choose. But either way, you have to decide what's your campaign going to be for restarts and new joins and rejoins. Okay. And there's obviously 100 ways you could go with that. But being a medical fitness center, I think we have a leg up on the general fitness population around our ability to execute around special populations and folks who have health needs. Okay. So I think there's a big chance for us to really take advantage of that in this market. Obviously, outlets are going to be social media. I think right now, social media is king in regards to what information is getting passed around. Obviously, connect it with your website, your email, and your calls. Okay, I'm not going to tell you how to do basic marketing. That's 101. But I think the key part here is make sure you cover each area. Make sure your website reflects what the current state of the business is. There's been times in the last week or two, I live in Florida, where I wondered, hey, gosh, I wonder if that place is still open right now. It's technically an essential, provider. And I look on their website and it looks the same as it did 3 months ago. And I have no idea if they're open or closed. I call the line, they don't answer. I guess they're closed. Maybe they're not. I'm not sure. But either way, people are going to jump on your website first and foremost. So those of y'all that have not created like information banners on the top of your website, I'd probably consider that too, so they know what's going on. And then what's your message, right? Are you talking about safety? Are you talking about cleanliness? Are you talking about your hours of operation? Are you talking about getting back in, creating safe space for people? They're going to be very nervous coming in the door. I think that's something else that's going to be talked about with Andy. So those are all things you have to consider. Is what is your message? That's something really the team, I think, can really help craft if I were y'all. And lastly, what is your offering for new members? Are you going to give no joiners fee? Or are you going to give reduced rates? Because this is going to be pretty gosh darn critical, because if everyone opens at the same time, it's going to be like the Wild West out there. I don't think there's ever been a scenario where this many new joins or rejoins have existed in the fitness industry. And the likelihood is there's going to be staggered reopenings. Some would argue the first to open in the market is going to do the best. Others would argue that, the first to open might be thought of, no one wants to be the first to open. They won't be viewed as being too risky, right? Somewhere in the middle might be the right answer, but with our health system partners, for those of y'all that have them, a lot of times that might be dependent on what they want and how they want to be viewed in the market. When it comes to sales, reactivation of members is going to be first, right? I think that you take that time in the pre-opening phase, your 7 days, your 3 days, whatever you determine your timeline to be, focus on getting those members reactivated. You're calling them, you're letting them know, you're informing them. They have no doubt in their mind what is getting ready to happen as far as your reopening plan. You try to recoup as many cancels of those folks that canceled, offer them whatever, special financial offer you want to offer them. And then think about bandwidth of your staff. This is going to be a very stressful time for them. What can you automate? Are there systems that exist out there in the market that you can potentially buy up? Does your member management service have a service that you can buy up with to help kind of create some kind of assistant coaching through technology? Now's the time to look at that. And everyone has a different member management service, so it kind of depends on that. Another thing to think about is if your sales staff are also your membership desk staff, prepare for heavy amounts of questions from members coming in the door, delayed times checking in due to social distancing. And if people are trying to join and swipe in and ask questions at the same time, your front desk is just going to be a very, very challenging place to be. I know a number of places have talked about creating like a rejoin table separate in the lobby or possibly even outside if that is allowable given your climate or your facility. Or, again, trying to do as much of that pre-opening as possible. And then lastly, finance. Ensure your bank draft and EFT is set to execute. I can't imagine that it wouldn't be, but if I were in your shoes of running a facility these days, I would be triple sure that the bank draft was going to be set to go. The last thing I'd want is that to get flubbed up somehow. Obviously, you have to take members off freeze. You have to have a discussion of, safety. Are you going to accept cash? If you're going to do transactions at the front desk, can you switch to just Apple Pay or app-driven pay so no one has to touch a credit card or touch any numbers or digits on a credit card machine? What about the prorated and refunded members that occurred as you were closing? All those things have to be taken care of in finance, right? So those are kind of some different departmental thoughts around creating a strategy and reopening. And I'll kind of close and wrap with the idea of creating that reopening timeline, creating a spreadsheet with your different departments, with your different targets, your different tactics, assigning them out to who owns it, and the amount of time you think you need to execute that, and maybe add a day to each one, just to be safe, right? You have to rehire staff. You have to bring frozen members back online. You have to develop new protocols to deal with all the new potential situations that arise out of operating a fitness center in the midst of at the end of a pandemic. You have to train staff in those new methods, communicate to members, and then you have to open, right? It's a lot. So, what will you need to execute each action item and how long will it take? And I think if you break it down into segments, have your plan, work your plan, be ready to pivot, I think we'll put our chances in ourselves in the best chance to be successful. So I'm going to pause there and pass it back to Bob and Marianne. Hope that was helpful, guys.
Okay, thanks. I appreciate that very much, Paul. It's a great information. And without any further delay, I'm going to ask Andy Dunn to jump on the line with us and let Andy talk to you about his perspective on restarts from Life Fitness. So thank you, Andy, and take it away.
Thanks, Bob. Appreciate it. I hope you can all hear me. Paul just made some fantastic points there. I think all of them incredibly valid, and some of those I'll touch on in a little bit more detail. As you guys can tell from my accent, I'm not necessarily local to these parts, but I've been living in the US now for 4 years. I've been with Life Fitness now I'm in my 14th year with Life. But prior to that, I spent 10 years as an operator of health clubs. So I really understand kind of from your side, kind of where you guys are coming from and what you're thinking about as you start to think about reopening facilities. And some some of the things that Paul touched on, I'm going to kind of maybe delve into maybe a little deeper, but some of the other things that I've been thinking about, and as Life Fitness, we've been discussing internally ourselves through our sales teams, but also, you know, with our customers and with our marketing teams. There's really kind of what I wanted to share with you guys today, 6 main points to touch on that I feel that sort of from a 30,000 foot perspective that I think we should all be really thinking about. And some of them, as I say, are related to some of the points that Paul just so eloquently talked about. And some of them maybe are things sort of more from a practical gym floor perspective that maybe we should all be thinking about. And so the 6 kind of main real points that I'll touch on with you guys today is first and foremost, social distancing. It's a term that we didn't even know existed about 8 to 10 weeks ago, but it is pretty much every other word that comes out of most people's mouths now. And we have to understand how that's going to really affect the facility once you guys, you know, open back up. And there are some key areas within that, and I think equipment placement is one that Paul just talked about, and understanding kind of what that actually looks like. You know, the messaging around that is probably going to be determined by local or state government. And you know, we're really, as Bob said in his opening, is we're really just awaiting that information. What is that going to look like from state to state, region to region? And ultimately, one of the things that we've been discussing internally from an equipment perspective is, what if you're only able to use every other product? For example, if you've got 20 treadmills on the gym floor, what if you're only able to use 10 of those? You know, and maybe you have to think about a strategy that, you know, on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, for example, of a week, you're going to use the odd number of treadmills, and then Tuesday and Thursday you're going to use the even numbers. What do you do on the weekends? How does that look from a cleaning perspective? So there are a number of things that you guys may need to consider just from a practical perspective on the gym floor that makes you think about your equipment placement. You know, do I need to take equipment off the floor? I'd really like to not take equipment off the floor, but how do I manage that properly? And while you're thinking about that and thinking about rotation, you know, equipment nowadays has many features that allow you to communicate with your members. Are you able to utilize those consoles, the screens, or anything within the facility that is really going to kind of talk and help members get back into their workout? So is there any welcome back messaging that you want to be able to push through the product that can actually start to remind them around kind of their responsibilities when they come back onto the gym floor, as well as their responsibilities on the gym floor? Thinking about how are you going to welcome members physically back onto the gym floor? Are you going to be thinking about, you know, creating new induction processes, refresher sessions, not only for staff but for members as well? These are things that, as you think about reopening, and as Paul talked about from a staffing perspective, you know, thinking about in a little bit more detail how you're actually going to welcome people back in is really critical. We've been talking internally a little bit about, do we create some refresher packs for our customers that allow them to actually show their members and welcome them back in, if that's a workout towel or a water bottle, something like that can really kind of help people feel more comfortable as they walk back in the door, and help them get back into their regular routine. And so when you start to think about a few of these little strategies here, they all are going to incorporate this word, social distancing. What does that look like? How do you manage it? And how do you communicate that out to members? The second piece that I wanted to talk to you guys about was positive messaging. Paul also talked about that, and in his marketing section, I think that's critical, that we really open a positive messaging campaign to our current members and also potential members. I think that creating a sense of calm and assurance is really going to be critical, because members are going to be looking for you guys to offer assurances, and make no bones about it, that will make decisions on how they spend their time and their money, and if they're going to do that with you, excuse me, or with a competitor. How are you reacting to this versus how your local competitors are messaging this is going to be really critical as you guys ramp up and open those doors. So start to consider how you'll provide positive messaging with a good sales approach. And so how do those two things work together? Again, to reiterate what Paul said, we are due to have the largest fitness industry pre-sale that we have ever seen. And it is going to be unprecedented. And I think Paul puts it mildly when he says it's going to be the wild, wild west. I think it's going to be craziness out there. So we have the largest fitness industry pre-sale that's going on right now. But here's where I think the health systems and you guys have an advantage. You guys are seen as the experts. So when it comes to opening back up and being careful about how you open and when you open, and some of that, as I say, is going to be defined by local government or state government. You guys are going to be seen as the experts, and people are going to look to you guys as those experts to offer guidance and assurance. And it's really important that I think that you guys craft and create that message that makes people feel comfortable to walk back in the door. So also with that, think about from a positive message perspective, think about how you can actually create that assurance. Does that allow you to create more communication with your members by telling them, for example, that you've worked with your fitness equipment supplier to provide a new layout, an alternative layout, so when members do walk back in the door, they can see that you guys have been thinking about how you can make the space better. Think about talking about your new cleaning regime or your new cleaning schedule, so that they feel that not only did you do maybe a new equipment layout, but while you had the equipment moved around, you were able to do a full deep clean. That's really positive messaging that you can talk to members about that will make them feel more comfortable as they walk in the door. Think about personal training offers. Think about membership drives, offers of short-term or long-term memberships, maybe some short-term memberships for new exercises. If you have a digital offering, what about an at-home and an in-club membership? Interestingly, a couple of customers that I deal with are already talking about the digital offering that they currently have, whether that's through Les Mills, whether that's through Life Fitness, whether that's through their equipment supplier or through a multitude of other online digital offerings right now. They're talking about, could we offer, potentially partner with that that online offering and actually offer an in-club and an at-home membership, which might mean that they can only utilize the facility, for example, after hours, from 8 p.m. at night or on the weekends, and then have this at-home membership. That could be a good way for you to think about all of the people right now that are out there that maybe have never stepped foot in the facility before, but are actually doing some stuff online because they're in their house. And so those are prospective new members. So it's really important that as you start to craft these messages, you start to think about these things and how, as you ramp back up, all of these little areas can help you create a longer term, a short, mid, and long term strategy. The third piece to come off the back of that is about digital content. What is the legacy of digital content within the fitness industry as we look at it today? We know that right now there's so much content out there, more than we've ever had in such a very short period of time. And how can you use that as you ramp back up with staff and personnel? And can it supplement your offering? And Paul talked about, scaling your personnel as they come back into the facility at the same rate that your membership starts to grow again and people start to come back into the facility. As Paul said, we may be at a point where you can only allow so many people per square foot in the facility. And so how can we actually utilize other elements to be able to help that ramp up? And digital is one way to be able to do that. There are multiple solutions out there right now, companies like Functional Solutions. You have MyZone type things that you can work with. I'm sure that a lot of you guys are familiar with, that could really help you as you start to put maybe virtual workouts on to start with, that can help take some of that burden off the fact that you are looking to ramp up staff. So think about what that digital content legacy could look like in your facility. And also, there are so many new users now outside of the facility at home right now today that are thinking about and using digital workouts. Maybe these are people that haven't walked in the door before, and it's a really good opportunity for them right now to be thinking about a low, slow start to their fitness journey. And when they are new to our industry, they also want to know that when the time is right for them, are you there for them when they want to go to that next level? When they want to move that journey further forwards, are you there? Is there a way that you guys can start to market to that group of people that are currently right now thinking about digital and digital only because that's all they're able to use? And then from an education perspective, as staff return, what's your plan? Think about things like adding refresher education on equipment, programming and procedures as you ramp back up with staff. You may, as you ramp back up, you may start to think about the way you program new members versus existing members differently. You may actually start to think about, from a process and procedure perspective, that you need to add more cleaning schedule or cleaning options into the day. And so thinking about, how are you going to reintroduce these into your staff and your trainers, daily regime? What does that actually look like? We're already thinking about what that can look like from an education perspective on equipment. Do we look at that from a digital perspective? Do we start to send you guys videos of, hey, this is how our consoles work? You may have some new staff that are coming through that want, that aren't necessarily as familiar with our product as they are somebody else's. What if we were able to kind of create some video content that could give that refresher training? So we're starting to think about it from an educational perspective, not only from a staff perspective as you guys return, but also educating members. As I said earlier, most consoles now have the ability to display messaging. Use it effectively. Talk to them about social distancing. Offer cleaning reminders. And the one thing that I think is really going to be important as we open back up and we start to maybe see social distancing measures come in, you may not be able to have, for example, 200 people on the gym floor. You may only be able to have 100. But those people really want to make sure that they can get an effective workout. You might want to think about limiting the time that people can have on the equipment. Most equipment now has the ability to be able to limit the time on, for example, a treadmill. So you can limit it to 20 minutes or 30 minutes. That way, it means that you can be considerate to all of those people that are coming through the doors to really want to be able to get their workout in, and everybody gets a fair crack as they walk through. So I think that's important, that you start to think about not only the education of your staff as they come back in and you ramp that up, but also educating members. It's an opportunity for you to hit reset. Which moves on to my next point, which is reevaluation. How is this, let's call it an interruption, but how has this interruption made you think about your business? Are you thinking about how you can hit refresh on the business? Does that include staffing levels, inventory levels, cleaning schedules? Most people now are really starting to think about all of these parts of their business that maybe they didn't think about before. I was talking to a customer out on the West Coast a week ago, and the example that I gave at that point, we were talking to those guys about staff levels, and we noticed that when we'd been there previously, they had a really high staffing level on reception. They'd got people that were actually swiping customers in. They then got 4 receptionists on the desk, and it was 5 p.m. when we were visiting. It was 5 p.m. and there was only 1 person in the gym. Having had that conversation since, they've come back and said, actually, we would reprioritize that, and maybe we would think about having less people on reception and maybe another trainer up in the gym when the gym's busy. So is this really giving you the opportunity to be able to think about, reset the business and think about staffing levels, think about those inventory levels, and maybe some of those cleaning schedules? And from a cleaning schedule perspective, most suppliers now, whether it's fitness equipment people, whether it is your flooring people, we all have recommended products to be able to clean. So work with us, work with those other vendors of yours, and find out what they recommend. That's going to be critical as you start to create this messaging around this, as you start to open up those doors. I talked just a little bit briefly earlier about equipment rotations. Don't forget how important those are. Certain products on your gym floor get utilized so much more than others. And now there is an opportunity that may happen even more if we're having to restrict the amount of product that people can use. Think about how that product could be rotated to get more life out of it, and also to make sure that you're optimizing and sweating the assets properly. And then the final one from me is about planning for the future. This is a really great time to think about planning for the future for you guys as you've hit that reset button, you've reevaluated, you've offered education, you're thinking about digital, you've created positive messaging to your customers, and you're thinking about things like social distancing. This is a really good opportunity to think about the future. Think about it. There are 356,000 fitness instructors in the United States, most of whom, not all, but most of whom right now are on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, and they are creating content. Some of it might be questionable. Some of it is fantastic. This is a really good opportunity, I believe, for our industry in general to start thinking about how we find these superstars and we use them better. And so this is a really good opportunity, I think, for you to think about how to bring the best people into the business when you open. Because right now, all day, every day, they are on social media and they are all auditioning right now. It's a really good opportunity for you to start looking in your local area, finding who those superstars are, and maybe even starting some interviews. So just to recap and just close that all up for you, the main sort of 6 points that really I've touched on today talk about social distancing. How is this going to affect the facility when you open? Create positive messaging. Create a sense of calm and assurance. Members will be critical over the way that you deal with that messaging and those assurances that you make. And how are you doing it versus what your local competitors are managing during the ramp-up period? Digital content legacy. Use the new digital content revolution to your advantage. Don't be afraid of it. Education, not only from a staff perspective, but think about it from a member perspective. And what is your plan when you return? Reevaluation. How has this interruption made you think about the business? Are you thinking about the business differently? Are you thinking about how to hit reset? Are you thinking about staffing levels? Are you thinking about inventory levels? Are you thinking about cleaning schedules? And then finally, plan for the future. This is a perfect time to do it. We are here to help you. Myself, Michelle Corley, who is our marketing lead at Life Fitness, Gary Kilanowski in the West, and Forrest Corey in the East. We are here to help you. If there's any stuff that we can do to help, by all means, contact Marianne and Bob directly, or you can contact me directly or find me on LinkedIn. But we're here to help you guys, and we want to make sure that this can go as smoothly as possible. With that, I'll pass back to Bob and Marianne. So thank you for listening, guys.
Thank you so much, Andy. I really appreciate your comments. Boy, this has been a huge amount of information today. Almost too much to take in. I hope you guys are enjoying it as much as I have been. Before we wrap it up and ask questions, I have just a couple of MFA spins on some of the information you've heard today that I want to add and get you to think about. As Andy just talked about, I think it's a great opportunity for us to reevaluate our businesses, but probably more important to reevaluate from your members' perspective, what is the value proposition that you offer to your members? So it's as medical fitness facilities, we talk about being a part of the continuum of care. So it's really maybe an opportunity to step up right now and ask yourself, honestly, how much do we really exist within the continuum of care, and what does it mean for us to exist within that continuum of care? And I think one of the opportunities that we have is to think about how we, as we go through this new pre-sales process or resales process, I really almost call it, how do we reposition our message? How do we change our messaging to emphasize your role in prevention, in treatment and management of chronic diseases, and your role as really a part of the healthcare system? So because you can't do prevention if you're not testing. And so many of our members are really bad about retesting at least on an annual basis. And we all talk about it, we all offer it, and we kind of pass it by that folks don't want to do it. Well, they don't want to do it any more than they want to get a mammogram every year, but they get their mammogram every year because it's part of their preventive care regimen if you're a woman and you're over 40. So we need to maybe think about how we promote what we do and really emphasize the medical fitness difference and focus on how can we truly integrate ourselves within that continuum of care. We can't do it if we're not gathering data, if we're not gathering those outcomes. So it starts with your messaging and sales. It's time to think about perhaps adding some new technologies. You heard Andy and Paul both refer to some of the at-home technology that we'll be putting into place. Does that lead to new opportunities for creating at-home memberships, as was mentioned, or to create some opportunities with business and industry with creating on-demand programming for those staffs, warm-ups, functional movements, all kinds of opportunities on the commercial side? How can we expand our concept of wellness centers without walls and take advantage of the new opportunities that are kind of being perfected during this pandemic, since we're having to talk about how do we stay connected when we're having, I hate the term social distancing, so I don't use it, I call it physical distancing, but how do we maintain a social connectedness while we're maintaining physical distancing, and what impact does that have on us when we reopen? Have you thought about perhaps surveying your members prior to reopening to see how they're faring, what do they want to see going forward, and how can we meet or exceed their expectations as we reopen and bring them joyfully back on into our membership? Is this an opportunity to talk to the public about what you guys have done during the pandemic, whether you've redeployed staff to help out in the hospital so you can portray yourselves and as you really are as frontline heroes in trying to help stop the pandemic, where that's been happening, or are you converting to child care center, or are you converting into a decontamination center for first line hospital staff? So what are y'all doing that's different than what your competition might be doing, and is there an opportunity for some public relations play there that will let your members know that you really have done your part during the pandemic to help fight it and really positions you well going forward? And the last thing is, it's already been mentioned, is there anything you want to change in your cleaning schedules, the spacing of your equipment, or otherwise practice physical distancing going forward, at least for a while, to help people feel safe and secure when they come back in to your facilities? So we have just a few minutes left for questions. Just want to leave you those thoughts to ponder. So I'm going to turn it back over to Mary Ann to moderate for the questions.
Great. So we have one question here. What consideration should be given to programming or engagement? Actually, it's a two-part question. And are there specific areas of fitness or wellness that would be most impactful as we reopen, or specific groups? Does somebody want to take that one?
Yeah, I'll have a go at that one, Marianne. So I think the second part of that is probably an interesting one. As we start to ramp back up, and maybe our staffing levels aren't necessarily where we would love them to be as we go back, I think it's interesting that a lot of the fitness industry right now is talking about one of the buzzwords for a while now as being small group training. Small group training is a really good way for us to move significant numbers of people through good quality coached, instructed workouts with relatively minimal staff. So it's going to allow you to be able to control a larger number of people, and that can be whether that is people, mums, active aging, performance athletes, anything and anybody at this point. I think a lot of this is going to be around, restricting, those numbers in those group X classes. What does that look like? The social distancing affect that. But small group training is a really effective way to be able to do that, and it can be applicable to all types of members. So that's kind of initially how I think that could work. The other element that I talked about earlier was the digital aspect of that. There are things out there like Digital Coach that you can actually create predefined workouts on there that people can follow. So that also can be a really good way as you're ramping up without maybe the staffing and the personnel that you would like, to be able to hit a number of points for different populations that are going to allow you to create this virtual workout that people can actually do in the facility.
Great, thank you. And so we had another question that came earlier about any ideas for special offers or class ideas to help members sort of ease back into their facility. I know we've talked a little bit about that.
Yeah, let me jump in on that one for a second. This is Bob. I'm really excited to tell you all this because the ink has barely dried on this agreement. But just this morning, the Medical Fitness Association signed an agreement with our industry partner, Les Mills, and they're going to be making available their Les Mills on demand for any Medical Fitness Association facility that wants to use it free for 60 days, which is a great way for you to reach out now if you don't have some offering for your members at home. But it's also a way to get them prepared and ease them back into the program. At the end of 60 days, they'll have the choice to either terminate it, or if they want to continue on with it, I think they're giving us a great discount. I think it runs $9.90 something a month, right at $10 a month. If they want to keep doing that, it's an opportunity for you all as facilities to continue to offer that. You could offer programs and that Les Mills on demand classes during your off-peak hours or times that you don't already have other scheduled classes for people that might want to get a group X workout or small group exercise workout then. But as we've talked about, it's a new opportunity to do things a little differently and to have offerings that otherwise you might not be able to. So we're excited about that. Stay tuned to our resources page for more information about that.
Yeah, Bob, it's Andy again. That's a perfect way for you guys to be able to bring that Group X sort of element back into the facilities to utilize the on-demand content. I think the world has changed a lot in the last 2 months with regards to digital. An industry that really wasn't necessarily on the forefront of digital was forced to become digital overnight. I think that's been really interesting, and I think as we start to think about those members coming in, I think one of the questions, Marianne, that you talked about there was about this whole pre-sale piece and positive messaging around that. I think with a solid sales plan, you really need to bring back members, and attract new members. We think a lot of those new members are going to come in two forms. I think you and I spoke offline about this earlier today, Marianne. We think that they're going to come in two forms. One, they're going to come existing exercisers, who do not feel assured or confident in their current provider, to accommodate what their new normal is. So that's why the messaging, and I believe that MFA and your associate members have the ability to be able to create that really positive messaging. And then the second group are these new exercisers that have been moving, with digital exercise programs, and perhaps they're now bored of lunges, squats, and burpees, and they want to take their exercise journey further. And I think, are the MFA members, are they there to help facilitate that new journey? And I think if you are, and then you can bring those people in through the programming like a Les Mills on demand, because it's something they're familiar with in their home, it creates a really nice transition into the facility that can start to attract new members.
Yeah, and in addition to that, I would be remiss if I didn't say, I know you guys, Andy, have some offerings in this area. I know Technogym is also making their MyCloud available. A number of our vendors are stepping up to help out during this time and make some of their services that help reach out to folks at home available. So I don't want to overemphasize one at the expense of another, because a lot of our vendor partners are really doing great jobs and doing great things with helping us step over into this digital world that we've been, as you just said, Andy, haven't figured it out up until now when we had to.
Yeah, and from our perspective, Bob, we know that there are a bunch of fantastic offerings out there. Life Fitness, Technogym, Matrix, Precore, all of those guys are thinking about this, and because we've had to, and the Les Mills one is just one of those, and it would be bad of us as suppliers not to band together right now and provide those solutions to really make sure that we can create one fitness community rather than fragmenting it. It just makes sense that we would do that. But that digital thing now looks like it probably isn't going to go away. And I think it's a really good opportunity for our industry to embrace it and actually utilize it for what it is.
Great. Well, that is all of the questions that we have right now. I'd like to thank all of our panelists today, Bob, Paul Prather from Power Wellness, and Andy Dunn from Live Fitness. There was a lot of information here. This recording will be posted on our new COVID-19 resources page. If you scroll down to the Wellness Wednesday section, there'll be links there for these recordings so you can listen to them again. And with that, I'll thank everybody, and we will see you here next Wednesday for our next Wellness Wednesday. Thank you.
Thank you, Marianne.
Thank you, Marianne.
Thanks, guys.
Andy.